Of Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, the CEO of WBC. And WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 80 organizations focused on women's leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion in business. And we are building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, action, advocacy, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. WBC lives its commitment to DEI, and members of our leadership, staff, board of directors, and our WBC champions include more than 34% people of color. And every one of our 4 action initiatives has DEI goals for 2025 and 2030. So please check the chat for the action initiatives, which range from women in the boardroom, the C-suite, STEM, entrepreneurs, and women investors, because it is through these initiatives that we aim to accelerate change. And join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. So each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showcasing leaders committed to allyship, inclusivity, and driving corporate purpose. So today, I am delighted to be joined by 2 incredible leaders in the WBC community, Karla Bousqet and Alison Richmond, who are both part of our champions and doing a lot of work across the WBC through our work streams. And we want to discuss how leaders and companies can align their purpose in their brand. So in the WBC Companies of Purpose Toolkit, which we released last December, we outlined 3 critical pillars of driving corporate purpose: DEI through talent, DEI through community engagement, and a focus where we will focus today on how companies use their brand. Because a brand that is aligned with a company's purpose provides clear direction for the companies and its employees. It aids in recruitment and retention and grounds an organization in politically turbulent times and just turbulent times economically. So more than ever, consumers and stakeholders are seeking businesses that have a brand that is aligned with the company's purpose. So I'm excited, Alison and Karla, to talk about how companies can be more intentional, how they use their brand to elevate their purpose, and how we talk about this. So welcome, Alison, and welcome, Karla.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as we mentioned, we have the 3 pillars for purpose: talent, brand, and community. But we know that purpose has become a corporate buzzword rather than a set of behaviors that should be guiding business strategy. So I'd love to hear from each of you, and maybe Karla, we can start with you about purpose and how companies can be intentional in defining what purpose looks like for their organization and defining how they're going to get there.
Well, thank you, Gwen. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you today and to be with Alison and joining this discussion. I think you're right about the buzzwords. People toss out words like purpose, values, beliefs. They all start to get mixed up together, and then they start to lose their meaning. So for me, if we peel back the word purpose, to me, purpose is the why. Why does a company exist in the marketplace, in society? What role is it trying to fulfill? And, to be intentional about defining a company's purpose, you have to extend beyond the products or the services that the company is delivering. And you have to go really deep into what does the company believe? So what does it believe about its customers or its clients? What does it believe about its employees? How does it want to interact with the communities where it's operating in? And I think it's really fundamental to say, how does it want to create stakeholder value and not just shareholder value? So to be intentional about that, I think the companies that have endured over decades and even reached the century mark, like IBM, they spend time creating a culture that reinforces their belief. And I think the first step is being clear on what the company fundamentally believes is its purpose. And that starts at the top of the organization with the leadership, and then it needs to trickle down and touch all parts of the organization. So really, I think the next step is creating an authentic culture that helps to reinforce the beliefs. Alison?
Yeah, Karla, I completely agree. Customers today, and when I'm saying customers, I'm thinking internal employees and stakeholders, as well as your actual end customer, they're savvier than ever, and they can smell a phony purpose-driven campaign a mile away, right? I mean, I think we all can. In fact, 86% of companies believe that they have a strong and stated purpose, but only 24% say that purpose is truly embedded in their culture and in their organization in a way that is influencing their culture, their innovation, and their operations. And that disconnect between the stated purpose and the activated purpose is exactly what is causing that distrust that so many people have today. So just as you said, Karla, I think getting really intentional and thinking about the idea that purpose is a business strategy and not a PR strategy. And so the brands that we see succeeding the most are doing that hard work that you were talking about, defining their why, really aligning that message into both their business operations, and then telling that story internally and externally in a genuine way that's also inspiring, but really true to where they are in their journey to purpose.
I'm going to push both of you a little bit on that, because I think as you both said, internally and externally, right? And for those in the audience, there's some people that aren't as maybe familiar with purpose. Are there some good examples of a company that is really communicating that well, externally? Like I remember back growing up, Ben and Jerry's was one of the first companies that sort of came out and was like, we have these values, we have this purpose, but like, who do you think is doing a good job? And Alison, you mentioned a little bit about sort of missing the mark. I want to hear a little bit about maybe just some examples without, naming or shaming anyone, of course.
Yeah, I think that I'd love to hear Karla's take on this too, but Patagonia is a company that I think a lot of people look up to that are really living up to its values and continuing to state what they're doing and show it in their actions. I also think Bombas is doing a really great job on the consumer side of living up to what they stated, their mission as a business. And going back to that definition of the purpose is more than the profits, right? It's about how they make decisions around driving growth and ultimately how they impact greater society. So those are the first two that come to mind for me.
Yeah, and I want to take a step back even further and maybe leave everybody with something, because we're here in Washington, D.C., at least Gwen and I are, and all of the cherry blossoms are out right now. And one of our great presidents, Abraham Lincoln, had a quote that is truly very pertinent to this discussion. Lincoln said that character is the tree and reputation is the shadow. So the shadow is what we think of the tree, but the tree is the real thing. And I think when companies are, looking at their brands, they need to be doing more than just managing the shadow, right? They need to tend to the health of the tree. And great companies that have a well-defined purpose, they know the why they exist. They spend more time focusing on the character. And for me, the character is the core values, it's the behaviors, it's how they show up in the marketplace. And, I think IBM, when it started, and I had a long career at IBM for 27 years, right? IBM knew it stood for innovation, and it was not about any specific product or service, because technology, moves so quickly that you can't just be about one product or service. And IBM, I think, built technologies that companies knew and they trusted. And there was even a saying about if no one ever got fired for buying IBM. And then IBM lost its way a little bit, and they fell behind in terms of technology and innovation. And Apple is a good example for me about a brand that, has taken an enduring idea of what does Apple stand for? And Apple says they are about thinking differently. And I'll just say, I'm going to hold up my prop. IBM's motto was think. So I think it's an intentional dig at IBM when Apple says that they're about thinking differently. But they truly do differentiate, and they create not only innovative products, but they focus on design, they focus on usability. Their brand stands for quality and for creativity. Another great company that I worked at was Procter & Gamble, P&G. And maybe when you think of Procter & Gamble, you're not really sure what brands, P&G sells. But they sell Tide detergent and Dawn dishwashing liquid. And I worked on Pantene. So these are products, that are known everywhere in the world. And I looked up their purpose statement, and I'm going to read it to you, and then I want to contrast it with their advertising. I think you're going to see it holds up. So in their purpose statement, Procter & Gamble says, we will provide branded products and services of superior quality and value that improve the lives of the world's consumers now and for generations to come. Now, think about how that translates in their commercials. We have the Olympics that are coming up, and everybody, I think, is familiar with the Olympic commercials where the mom is, taking care of the future Olympic athlete, and she's doing the dishes and doing laundry and then taking them to their soccer games and to swim practices. And the commercial ends with a really great line. It says, P&G, proud sponsor of moms. So, I think Apple, P&G, those are companies that are they're maybe more traditional companies, but they do an excellent job of communicating purpose through their brands. And I think that purpose then really resonates with consumers.
I love that. And I want to go into kind of some of the how about this, right? So as we all talk about at WBC often, Karla, as you know, and Alison, as you know, we say, in order to drive diversity, equity, inclusion, whether it's talent, whether it's in community engagement, that commitment needs to come from the top. It needs to kind of be in that C-suite and that they play an incredible role. Karla, I know you've worked with a lot of C-suite leaders. What are some of the considerations when they're thinking about purpose and brand? What are some of their best practices? And how can they really make sure that it's authentic, going back to Alison's point?
Yep. So again, thank you, Gwen. You're right. I have worked with the senior leadership in IBM, and I got to work very closely with IBM's first female CEO, Ginny Rometty. And, I think Ginny understood the difference between the tree and the shadow. She knew that as a tech company, we need to restlessly reinvent. So we're always inventing new products, new technologies. But she also knew that at our core, we needed to stay true to our own purpose and live our values and really show up as the IBM that we want to be. So one of the first things she did when she became CEO was she engaged all employees in an exercise, and she invited them to update the IBM values. And I thought this was great. I was part of the team that helped to execute it. But basically, for 48 hours straight, IBMers from around the world were invited to be part of a values jam. So they knew that this exercise was going to be about creating the values at IBM. And it's taken from the idea of a jam session in jazz. So everyone is contributing to the music, right? Yeah. So our senior leaders, Ginny had them, all of the senior leaders, whether you're running a country, a business unit, you were online hosting chat rooms, and you were there to help spark ideas and then collect contributions from employees. And the employees, it was a global exercise. IBM is in almost 190 countries around the world. So that's why it had to run continuously for 48 hours. And I think what was most important about it was we focused on how were we going to put the values to practice. And we even invited clients to provide input on how IBM behaves when we're at our best and what makes IBM essential to their business. So it was a tremendous undertaking. And at the end of the day, we not only updated the value statement, but we really were able to lean into the actions then that the IBMers had identified and that the clients had identified that allow us to take those values and live them. And what I would say more generally is that I know not every company can, engage in a worldwide online experiment, but I do think leaders need to create opportunities to communicate. They have to communicate about the purpose, the values, and they need to talk to employees about how they can take actions to live up to them. And then the leaders themselves really need to set the standards and walk the talk. So I'll just say leaders, across the organization can be and have to be clear about what the purpose of the organization is, the why, right? And then they need to work with their teams to ensure that everyone is embracing common values, the how. And I think if they do that, then that helps everyone to be able to embody the company's purpose.
Yeah.
And I
Karla,
love
you know,
your, go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Alison.
I was just going to say, Karla, I love what you just said, and that leaning into the strengths is really something that we guide our clients through. When I think about, what really makes the difference, there's a lot of ways to do that. I love the jam example. When a virtual world, we do virtual workshops where we actually bring everyone together and do a brand sprint and do that exact same exercise. That's so critical. We actually did it recently in our own organization. We went through a rebrand really around the vision of our founder and CEO to rise up others. And if you see everything from our new messaging to our new branding, which is based on a sunrise, really embodies that. And so I think that's just a critical part when you think about how do you become intentional at this, that you lean in. You lean into your strengths as that starting point so that you have that start of authenticity. And then the other thing that I think is really important to consider, and part of what you were saying about the role of the leader, is the transparent communication. Purpose isn't perfect. And so when things aren't going exactly aligned to your values, it's such a critical time to raise your hand, to talk about it, to communicate that, whether that's internally or with customers. That's how you truly live your purpose. And that's how we see the brands doing the best work, is that transparency. Saying we missed the mark here, we're going to do better, if that's the message, or saying we really believe we are living up to this one specific value. It's such a critical part of the conversation to build that genuine and authentic brand and purpose.
I love that, Alison. I know, you've worked a lot too with sort of startups and organizations that are getting going sort of from the beginning. Are there different and unique challenges with that, or is it still some of the sort of same best practices as we're looking at starting out to develop purpose and as you're building that through your C-suite to how you communicate with your customers?
I think that's a really great question. And I think the benefit that startups has is they don't have the history. When we work with companies that have been around 5-10 years, they need to consider what they've done in the past in order to build that inspiration and aspirational message for the future. If there's a disconnect there, it goes back to that same lack of credibility around what you're stating that you're going to do and what you're actually activating or doing. So it doesn't mean that you can't and you shouldn't shift. It's just something to take into consideration and how you communicate it with your internal employees and your customers. And then the other key takeaway that I think is critical for everyone, regardless if you're a startup or if you've been around, 15, 20, even more, 50 years, is engaging your employees from the start. And Karla really started to hit on this, but use your employees as those brand ambassadors. And the more that they live and they believe in the message, it's going to resonate to other employees. It's going to resonate to customers. It's going to resonate to the market and society as a whole. And that's really what purpose-driven branding is all about.
That is fantastic. No, I love that. And I love the focus on really kind of building up that internal and that sort of consultative mode, right? Of like, it's sort of a two-way street. You've got to set the tone as the senior leaders, you've got to set the values, but you've got to make sure you're hearing how people are viewing those and being involved in implementing, right? So I think incredible.
Authenticity, as Alison said, is really the key. And you can own up if something does not go perfectly the way that you wanted it to, but it is what people are looking for today, whether you're an employee or whether you're a consumer. You're looking for companies that are authentic, and some of the ones that have failed take actions that maybe are in conflict with their stated brands. And I think it's right for people to call that out as well and try to see that gets addressed.
Absolutely. And now we've come to the part where we're running slightly out of time. So I want to get the sort of call to action from each of you. So, as the audience knows, we're action for impact, the WBC, right? So what is your call to action, Alison, and around the sort of brand, purpose, authenticity? What's your call to action?
Mine personally is the people behind the project, making them the center of your business model and the heart of what you do. That's really what I think of my call to action and purpose.
Karla?
Mine is embrace your values and embody your purpose. And that can be for an organization, for a corporation, but even more fundamentally, I think it's at an individual level. As a person, you have to know what your own values are, and you want to show up every day embodying your purpose. And if you're working at a company where your values do not align with that company, I'd say you'll be miserable. So go start to look for companies that do, embody the values that you believe in, and then you'll feel much better and be able to contribute in a much more significant way.
Yeah, Karla, I just have to add to that. We say a lot, like purpose and culture is a team sport. So
Yep.
Everyone has a role to play in that. I love that.
I love it, Alison. I totally agree.
And that's perfect, because that goes with the mantra of Women Business Collaborative, where we want to do everything together. We're faster together in that team sport. So I'm going to use that. But we have run out of time. Thank you, Karla. Thank you, Alison. It has been wonderful. I look forward to continued conversations. And everybody in the audience, we'll invite you to wbcollaborative.org, where you can learn more about our initiatives to increase women in the C-suite and boardroom, to address the underrepresentation of women in STEM, but women investors and women in entrepreneurs, and also help us build a pipeline of women leaders that are going to bring gender, pay equity, diversity, equity, inclusion to the business landscape. So join us weekly to keep up to date on our next guest, the progress, the movement for gender equity. Follow us on social media.